if you have a Visa card in your wallet, and I hope you do, you could whip out your card and it would work exactly the same way, no matter where you are. And that truly is, if you boil it down, that's really the magic of what our network business really is. And ultimately, if you can bring the exact same experience, which we work very, very hard to do, from a physical environment to an online environment, from an online environment to a app environment, to an app environment to a to an AI-driven commerce environment. Ultimately, regardless of how you choose to hold your funds, in which bank or which financial institution or stablecoins, you want to make sure that you have an enormously delightful experience. And not only just that, but
today's guest is Rubail Birwadker, Visa's SVP and Global Head of Growth. Visa has made strides across the crypto sector in recent years and months for launching a bunch of different things, from stablecoin-backed payments in Latin America recently to launching a tokenization platform for banks back in the fall. I'm excited to have Rubail on the show today to discuss the latest with Visa. Welcome.
Hi, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. To start off, I don't know if I would say you're fully in the Web3 space, right? But can you tell us a little bit about how you got into it and now you're working with it?
When you say you, as in you mean me or Visa, because they're two very different journeys.
We could start with you and then maybe Visa's journey into it as well.
Sure. I think for me, it's actually relatively straightforward. I've been with Visa practically my entire working career. So coming up on 14 years, I've held a variety of leadership roles within the company. Most recently, I was running our M&A ventures team. And in the past 7 or 8 months, I've sort of taken the helm of all the work that we're doing around the company across many of our growth functions, including all the partnerships we do with, important big tech, fintech, crypto clients, as well as some of the growth product development work that we're doing that we recently announced at our product drop a couple of days ago across agentic AI-driven commerce, across stablecoins and crypto, and a number of things across the non-carded space. And a couple of products that we announced in that space were Visa Pay and Visa Accept. So my journey has mostly been a crypto curious person to ultimately helping lead some of our work in the space on behalf of my employer, Visa, which is one of the largest and most important payment institutions in the world. So we take this with an enormous amount of responsibility in how we sort of work with the industry in the space. And as far as Visa's role has been concerned in the crypto stablecoin space, the funny thing is we've actually been involved in the crypto space for a pretty long time, I think more than half a decade. And primarily for the first few years, our focus at Visa was primarily on interoperability, which was how do we make sure that Visa's existing products, our debit cards, credit cards, prepaid cards, across various different functions and form factors, were used productively and interoperably with the crypto ecosystem. So can you buy digital assets? Can you do off-ramp of digital assets? What does that really look like? Can you use things like push payments in and out of crypto assets? And that is where we spent an enormous amount of time making sure that we were compatible. And I think some interesting stats, which we shared a couple of days ago at our product drop, related to those on-ramp, off-ramps were we've done more than about $95 billion of purchase volume related to crypto on Visa cards over the past 5 or so years. And roughly about $25-ish billion of payment volume was used to spend using Visa cards for using crypto assets. So while those are not enormous numbers compared to Visa size and scale, but they're still very, very meaningfully large numbers. And we see that they're going to continue to meaningfully grow in the coming months and years.
Out of that total volume amount, how much of that was in recent years compared to the holistic amount? Has it ramped up in recent years and months, or is it kind of been gradual?
Well, I don't have the exact year-by-year breakdown. I think that the trend line has largely mimicked the macroeconomic environment and how crypto assets have done as a popular mode of instrument in the public zeitgeist. So it obviously was ramping up, and then there was a little bit of a period where it wasn't, and now we're back in a period where it is ramping back up again.
There we go. When you're thinking about growth and ramping up and all this, as the global head of growth, what does that kind of look like for you with crypto in mind, especially at a massive financial services company like Visa? Where do you really see the best opportunities for you to tap into today?
That's a great question, and especially as it relates to bringing crypto slash stable coins in the context of growth.
Hmm.
For us, ultimately, our job at Visa is to make sure that we are creating the most delightful, safe, secure, frictionless experience for our customers, regardless of how and where they choose to pay or get paid. That
Hmm.
is the mission of the company, and we consistently remain focused on that mission. I always sort of like make this analogy, which resonates with a lot of folks that I talk to, which is if you have a Visa card in your wallet, and I hope you do, you could fly
I
to like
do.
200
Yeah.
countries. Yeah, great. I'm
To go
glad you
pull
do.
it in,
And
read my credit card information. Yeah.
thank you for being a user. And
Of course.
and
Yeah.
you could take a flight out of New York to about 200 different countries around the world. You could whip out your card, and it would
Hmm.
work exactly the same way, no matter where you are, from Johannesburg to if Athens. You could go to anywhere around the world, it
Hmm.
works exactly the same way. And that truly is, if you boil it down, that's really the magic of what our network business really is.
Hmm.
And ultimately, if you can bring the exact same experience, which we work very, very hard to do, from a physical environment to an online environment, from an online environment to a app environment, to an app environment, to an AI-driven commerce environment, ultimately, regardless of how you choose to hold your funds, in which bank or which financial institution, or in what form or factor, whether it's like US dollars, European euros, British pounds, Japanese yen, or stable coins, you want to make sure that you have an enormously delightful experience. And not only just that, but you know that after using a Visa card, you have the sense of security that your money is safe. You have the dispute chargeback rules where you feel safe, like about the things that are hiding behind the Visa brand and that our brand delivers and promises.
Hmm.
So hopefully that answers the question, but like that's where we consistently continue to think from a growth perspective, like how do we continue to offer that experience? And
Right.
ultimately we have to follow where the consumers are going. We spend
Yeah.
a lot of time doing research, doing a lot of getting a lot of feedback from customers, from clients. And ultimately, if clients want to hold money in stable coins, if they want to move money in stable coins, if they want to do things in crypto, we have to make sure that we consistently innovate to make our products and services compatible with our consumers want to go.
Hmm. You also mentioned while you're talking the idea of like being able to, dispute charges and things like that. In crypto, there's kind of this notion that like once you send money, you can't get it back. Or send crypto, you can't get it back. I guess it's a form of money. But is that a possibility in the future as Visa integrates with digital assets? Like, do you think, hey, if I spent or like sent over accidentally, it would be possible to get it back?
I think that's that is a very that is a very good. I think that's a great insight in how you're trying to tie the
Hmm.
crypto world to the way we think about like the Visa
Right.
network based card oriented world. And here maybe let me answer it from a perspective as to how we see our business, which is anything that we do, any products that we launch, any partnerships that we do, we have an enormous amount of focus on ensuring that our product innovation is largely global. So we have about 14 and a half, 15,000 banks that we work with around the world. We have about 150 to 200 million merchants that accept Visa payments around the world. And everything that we do, we try to make sure that the ecosystem sort of like moves along. We try not to do sort of like, things that are relatively narrow, that are not scalable, expandable to consumers all around the world. And one key promise of what we try to do is making sure that the consumer feels safe, secure with the money when they're using a Visa card product. So for us, any single thing that we do, especially that sort of like, again, interrelates with crypto, with AI, with any other
Hmm.
type of payment method, form, function, we want to bring that promise,
Hmm.
regardless of how it is, and that I believe it's an important part of our brand proposition. So as long as we are involved and a Visa card is involved, I believe the promise of what we do with disputes, chargebacks, keeping your money safe,
Right.
um, is going to be a very, very important key fundamental part of our value proposition.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, that would be nice. When it comes to creating on and off ramps, people want it to be easy. Historically, using crypto on and off ramps has not been that easy. Swiping my credit card, for better or for worse, has been relatively easy. But when you're thinking about the way money moves, especially across Visa's cards, why turn to crypto? What about it do you guys want to implement that you think would make your services and products better?
Um, I think that's a really that question sort of like goes into the insight of how do we think about product development or the
Hmm.
work that we want to do with the crypto industry. And I think the way I would answer it is across three different pillars. We spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I think the first pillar, which is a little bit obvious when you sort of like start to like unpeel what's behind it, is we think that stablecoins as a function of the crypto industry can provide a very, very good utility
Hmm.
to sort of like upgrade the modern settlement infrastructure. Today, when money moves around the world, especially money as it moves as it relates to the Visa ecosystem, because like I mentioned, we have like this massive ecosystem. We settle trillions and trillions of
Hmm.
dollars of volume annually around the world. Um, Today, the movement of money after you sort of like made a purchase, and then the money needs to settle between a merchant and an acquirer or between banks, it still needs to go through the corresponding banking hops. And I
Right.
think stable coins in and itself are a really, really good technology to help sort of like, overcome and modernize the big challenges that exist with the existing sort of like infrastructure of like settlement.
Hmm.
As a result of that, again, part of the first pillar, we started to pilot this service with many of our crypto native companies that would allow them to send and do settlement with us directly in stablecoins.
Hmm.
So for us, this is truly like a good use of a technology that has found really, really good product market fit as we
Hmm.
see it in our business. So that's very obvious. We're going to do more of that. We've done about, a little over 200 something $1 million of settled volume on stable coins in our settlement pilot. We want to expand that. We want to take it beyond $1 billion in the next year or so, and we'll continue to expand it. But again, we want to make sure that we're doing it right. We are bringing the right partners along. We have the right risk mitigation factors in place. So, we try to do things right,
Hmm.
because ultimately, when they're done with a Visa brand backing it, we want to make sure it has, the thoughtfulness that goes into our product development. So that's the first pillar of why we believe, what are the things that we think about as it relates to the crypto world and the things that we're doing. The second piece that we've spent a lot of time thinking about is how do we ensure that we give consumers that like to hold crypto assets, like to hold stable coins and custodial wallets, and how do we give them the opportunity to use it in a way that's delightful and interoperable.
Hmm.
We have enormously, or some of our most enormously positive assets at Visa are things like our acceptance footprint. Like I mentioned, you could fly to 200 countries, and there's probably someone accepting Visa where you can buy a good or a service.
Hmm.
And if we can provide that acceptance footprint to the hundreds of millions of customers around the world that are holding crypto or stable coins in their custodial wallets, I think it's a win-win.
Hmm.
Suddenly now, when the money is at rest, becomes more useful as money at move, and it starts to sort of like, see real unlock of use cases at the acceptance footprint
Hmm.
piece. And finally, I think the third use case, which I think you like briefly touched upon, was what we announced last year was our VTAP platform. So as I mentioned, we work very, very deeply with the industry. We spend a lot of time with our financial institution partners, and many of them come to us and say, okay, like, how should I think about this? What should I do next? What does that strategy look like? And we've spent a lot of time consulting with them, working with them, taking feedback from them, and frankly advising them in many cases. And which is one of the reasons why we started to build like the early stages of what we think is a financial infrastructure for help them sort of like become more compatible with stablecoins. Like if they were to issue their own coin, what would that look like? And how would we allow them to do that? And as part of that, we announced recently that we are working with BBVA using our VTAP platform to announce their first euro-backed stablecoin later this year.
Hmm. Yeah, for context, for those who don't know, in the fall, Visa announced or introduced the Visa Tokenized Asset Platform, or VTAP, like you've been calling it, to help banks issue fiat-backed tokens. Live pilots were slated to begin in 2025, but you're saying it is 2025, but later this year with
Later this year
BBVA?
is right.
Okay.
Yep.
Are there other updates on that front that you could share? Kind of like how things have transpired since the announcement to like what's going on in the background?
Um, Look, it's fast and furious. But again, we are making sure that we are deliberately doing it right. We're taking our
Hmm.
time and like sort of like doing it right. Sometimes when it comes to money, it's probably better that we double check and quadruple check our work.
Yes.
Unlike software, which
Hmm.
is again like there's a function of speed to software, which actually makes it an enormously there's a good reason why sometimes speed is a good thing. And again, we like to
Hmm.
move as fast as we can, but especially when we're touching money, we have to make sure that we're doing it we are extremely deliberate that it's
Hmm.
right. So sometimes speed is not always the right trade-off, but we're moving as fast as we can for what it's
Yeah.
worth.
And from the conversations you're having with these banks, what are the types of things they want to do with these fiat backed tokens or stable coins, however they're interpreting it? And where do you see the opportunity with them on that front?
I, Look, I think it's still very early days, especially as
Hmm.
it relates to financial institutions. Just like there's nothing there I can share that is not already speculated or discussed very, very deeply on like the various blogs or on X or on podcasts, which is there are an enormous amount of like use cases where it
Yeah.
could be helpful both for internal treasury operations and for use cases related to money movement. The question really is, as we see more regulatory clarity come through, especially in the United States, I think some of those will become even more real, and you will start to see more credible institutions of all kinds try and do interesting things in the space. So a lot of, I use this analogy usually, which is a lot of the work that you need to do in the crypto stablecoin space is you're driving like a 14-foot truck in a lot of fog with like your wipers for like going full speed. And as like that fog starts to like settle and you can see the road wide ahead, you can go faster. You
Mm.
can do the right turns and you can make sure you're staying in your lane and you're doing it right. So like I said, we have, again, at least from my perspective, we are in relatively early days.
Hmm.
And I can imagine a number of different use cases emerge once as we see regulatory clarity, but as also like, banks and other institutions get more comfortable with the
Hmm.
technology, with its utilization. And we'll probably start to see more of that in the coming months and hopefully in the coming months.
Yeah. And crypto's still in the fog right now, driving down the road in the fog.
I wouldn't want you to quote me on that. All I'll just say is more clarity, the better.
Yes. Well, I agree with that for sure. Before you also talked about settlements, and it made me think about also like credit card processing fees. How would integrating this maybe close that gap between the about 3% fee in the US, in some areas, maybe it's bigger, and making it smaller so that maybe these small businesses or businesses in general can get more back opposed to like losing money to credit card processing fees? Remember trying to move your assets between chains, watching the minutes tick by, wondering if your transaction would make it? Yeah, we've all been there. But here's the thing. While other bridges feel like taking the scenic route, Across is your express lane. Base, Arbitrum, Optimism, boom, boom, boom. Your assets move between them faster than you could say cross-chain. Across isn't just another bridge. When Uniswap needed the fastest, most reliable way to move assets cross-chain, they chose Across. Now, millions of Uniswap users are swapping between chains without even thinking about it, because that's how it should be. Whether you're moving assets yourself or building the next big thing in crypto, Across makes cross-chain feel like the same chain. No more scenic routes, no more complexity, just 2-second transfers between chains. Ready to join the Express Lane? Head to across.to and experience what bridging should have been all along.
Look, I think economics it's an interesting sort of like area to delve deep into. I'm not sure like I'm like the de facto expert to sort of like go deep into that. The only thing I'll point toward is in order to make something work across borders in a seamless way, you need to make sure that the right incentives are available for all the parties involved ultimately. And that ends up being a relatively complex process. Sometimes the focus tends to be around one part of the economic equation versus the others, but ultimately, there is a lot of value in facilitating transactions in a seamless, frictionless way, but also in a way that, you can capture the right fraud metrics associated with it. You can capture the right ways of ensuring that, you can have a ecosystem that sort of like moves along. And sometimes in a narrow use case, you can sort of like ascribe a lot of value and say, okay, why is something worth X and not Y? But when you look at the entire ecosystem as a whole, especially as you look globally, and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the use cases that we've been talking about as it relates to Visa are primarily in emerging markets, right? The
Mm-hmm.
announcement that we did with Bridge primarily focuses on the work that we're doing in Latin America, where
Yeah.
just cash is very, very prevalent. There is no
Mm-hmm.
real there is no real way of sort of like, there is no real ubiquitous digital payment method that actually works. And in fact, the cost of cash is incredibly high.
Yes.
Accounting is
Yes.
hard. Like cash gets the cost of cash is actually exceptionally high on a number of different metrics, going from macroeconomic to just socioeconomic. So as a result of that, I think how do the economics over a long term play out? I have like no crystal ball to see what that means. What we do know is consumers, as it relates to the current form function, want to use some of these products in a way that actually makes them very, very comfortable as to where their money is being moved. But maybe you ask me this question in a year and I'll have a different answer.
Yeah, we'll rediscuss. I'm glad you brought up Bridge, because that was actually going to be my next question, was regarding Visa's recent launch with the stablecoin backed card in a partnership with Bridge, which is a stablecoin infrastructure provider. And you mentioned Latin America. I was actually in Argentina in the fall. And like the whole situation, I'm based in the US, like I'm very fortunate in the sense that like I could use a card, I could use cash, I could do whatever I want to spend money, but they're like, they don't want you using cards. They want cash. Getting cash out of the banks is impossible. There was actually a lot of like storefronts accepting stablecoins and or like Bitcoin. And it was one of the first times I've ever seen something like that. Like I feel like I don't really travel to a lot of countries where there are these economic instances where they need more stable currencies, right? And so I think maybe in part I'm helping you answer your question, but what was the significance behind this partnership, and where do you really see the opportunity in Latin America, specifically, it's Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Peru, and Chile. I got you.
Yeah.
I got you with the countries.
you got me. I have a list somewhere, but I think
yeah. I wrote it down.
You got me right. Look, I'll go back to the same fundamental use case. By the way, the Bridge team is fantastic. Zach and team are awesome. We really truly enjoy our work with them. They're just super fun to work with. And I think they're helping us figure out like how can we bring the Visa stack and our asset in ways that are like more productive, because they see the world in a much more native way of like, the tens of millions of consumers around the world that are holding these stable coins and custodial wallets. I think Argentina is a very, very good example. There is no reason why someone who has stable coins that they're holding in Argentina and they want to associate them as a ledger with a card. So that way you're not really tied to a currency you don't want to be tied to. You're tied to a asset that you really, really want to hold, and in a way that you feel very secure about the volatility and this or conversely, the stability of what that asset is, which is stablecoin in this case, and be able to spend anywhere Visa is accepted. And I think this is not only just a Latin American proposition. I think we are working with them to look at other markets around the world, including other emerging areas in Asia, Middle East, Africa, because we're seeing consistently similar themes, which is consumers want to hold money in certain asset classes. Stablecoins is a very, very good example. And they want to make sure that how do I make sure I'm not taking the stablecoins, converting into a local currency, then figuring out how to spend it, and then converting it back to like a asset class I feel comfortable holding. So I think the Bridge use case really truly solves for that, and it solves it in a very, very developer friendly way, because now just like making this available through a single API to the developers, and they'll be able to build some really enormously interesting use cases, we think, on top of that, especially because now that they have access to all the Visa acceptance, not only physical acceptance, but also online acceptance. So they can then buy using these cards from like merchants that are selling goods and services online, not only based in Argentina or Colombia, but based in the United States or Europe or anywhere else. So we really, really like the cross compatibility of how can we make accessibility of buying goods and services from a asset class that a consumer prefers to hold it in versus a local currency that they want to hold the money into.
I just want to clarify for this card, how does it work for people? So like, let's say I want to get it, and let's say I don't have any stable coins. Is the card not for me, or is this card for people who already have stable coins or can like get paid in stable coins? Kind of walk us through like what this actually would look like in practice.
Yeah, I think this one's primarily focused on delivering an off-ramp for stablecoins. Ultimately,
so
if you do want a card,
coins. Yeah.
Correct. Use the stable coins anywhere Visa is accepted. I mean, that's really like the core of the value proposition. Obviously, if you do want a Visa card, we would encourage you to contact your local bank or a
There you
local
go.
fintech.
Yeah.
That is,
There's there it
you know,
is.
we'd like to think that, we make the ubiquity and availability of Visa
Mhm.
products, our credit cards, debit cards, commercial cards, almost anywhere in the world. Having said that, like typically they haven't been tied to asset classes that are not, a local native currency, and stable coins are starting to sort of like change that.
Mhm. What other emerging markets are you focusing on? I know you mentioned the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. Is it all of the above, or is there a specific one that you would like to target in the near term on the
Um,
stablecoin Visa front and maybe the
yeah,
broader
it's
market?
a,
Yeah,
it's the perennial question. We have limited amount of resources, and we want to do
right.
more, and we want to do more with partners like Bridge. And
Hmm.
every market is a little bit different. They have local regulatory nuances. They have local data, local localization requirements. They have local regs. They have local currency controls. So we just need to make sure that anywhere we expand, we have like the right set of framing compliance requirements, regulatory requirements that we are meeting. We take anything that we do, especially expansion into international markets, very, very seriously. We'd like to open it up everywhere. But again, unlike software, when you're touching money, you have to make sure that you're doing it right in
Hmm.
ways that's not only right for the consumer and their money, but it's also right for the local governments and local merchants.
Hmm.
So we'd like to expand it as broadly as we can. But again, we're going to let the rope out a little bit slowly in the coming months and years. But there are markets in all the regions that you mentioned that are under evaluation that we continue to go back and look at and figure out where can we expand more with partners like Bridge.
Hmm. I also saw the recent news too with World, the crypto project co-founded by OpenAI's Sam Altman, is working with Visa to allow digital assets to be accepted anywhere Visa is, which I liked that little slogan they threw in there because it's clear. How do you see this integration expanding the reach of digital assets and financial payments, maybe beyond stablecoins or including stablecoins?
Yeah, look, I think the basic concept is exactly the same.
Mm,
Um, you know, Bridge is primarily focused on expanding it for stable coins. I think with the World team, we see them doing it with various like different types of digital assets that they sort of like are focused on. Ultimately, our role, especially like remains relatively narrow. As in, you have a digital asset, you want to tie it to an off ramp. You want to make sure that that off ramp card is then available in a certain market, depending on if you're meeting the local requirements. I think there is, at least from our perspective, the uniqueness of what we're trying to provide doesn't really vary all that much. It just comes down to the work that we have to do with a specific partner and making sure that the integration works and they have like local banking partners or local processing partners, and we have made that available to them. But again, from
mm,
our perspective, our role is to provide a off ramp to a digital asset that we get comfortable with, which whether it's World or whether it's stable coins that Bridge is providing or any other partner that we've announced this with.
mhm. Yeah. In terms of partnerships, do you guys prefer to do things in-house or you rather work with like a good team that's already, working on it and then like, collaborate?
It's a great question. I've been in and out of leading many partnership teams at
Hmm.
Visa, and the thing I'll always say about partnerships at Visa is it's not just important to our business; it's fundamental to our business. Um, we are a company built on a deep network that is deeply, deeply partnered by like I said, 15,000 banks on one side and
Yep.
over 150 million merchants on the other side. And you can't really expand a network if you try to sort of like do everything on your own. Ultimately, our
Hmm.
job is to make sure that we create a network that is consumable, deployable, composable, that can then be used by our partners as it is, right? Like, whether you pick any partner around the world that works with us and they utilize our services and then deploy them and use them and make them available like in other ways, shapes, and forms. The bridge is a very, very good example. We can now make the off ramp available, which they can then deploy and make it available in many markets. They have to do a lot more heavy lifting than we do in this example. And our hope is we continue to expand this to other partners. And we do this in all ways, all shapes and sizes, not just in crypto, but almost in any other way that we work, whether we work with acquirers like Stripe around the
Hmm.
world, or we work with issuer processors like Marqeta around the world. Our job is to make sure to make our network available, and then we rely on partners to do
Hmm.
the last mile.
Yeah. Some of our listeners are founders, operators in this space, in the crypto space. I'm sure they're wondering what type of partnerships you're looking for. Can you characterize what that is or?
From a crypto perspective,
Yeah, crypto. A state of the crypto
I mean,
sector.
look,
Yeah.
Look, I think the answer is nothing's off the table. We're always, we were always willing to talk and spend a lot of time with founders. I mean, this is where we get our energy, we get most of our ideas, and it, everything that we do and build are primarily built on the feedback and the insights we get from clients directly or customers
Mhm.
directly. So, you know, if you think that Visa should be thinking about a certain thing, look, we're always open to new ideas. And obviously like I said, we have like a long list of partners that we sign with. We announce some of them, we don't announce all of them, but we do a lot of partnerships, a lot of commercial agreements every year, and we continue to expand that list. And the list has gotten pretty long on the crypto side, and expect it to get longer. So yeah, I mean, we're open for business. Come talk to us.
Yeah, go pitch him. I also wanted to ask you on the front of tokenization, how do you think about that in terms of expanding Visa's reach? A lot of people nowadays are talking about on-chain finance. We had Ondo's CEO on last week, and we talked about like all the opportunities that persist there for, crypto institutions, retail players, but then also the traditional players out there. How do you think about tokenization? Is that a big topic internally or not so much at the moment?
Um, I think the simple way to answer that question is we think about it, but our plate is relatively full for what it's
Yeah.
worth. We
Hmm.
have a lot on our hands between some of the things that I talked about today, which is creating the on ramps, off ramps, getting them right, expanding them, which is like a much simpler, clearer uh, product market fit driven value use case of the work that we're doing with the likes of Rain, where they're bringing their
Hmm.
credit card receivables on chain using USDC on the settlement network. We're spending a lot of time on that. Obviously, I talked about the work that we're doing with some of our banks on the Visa tokenized asset platform. And yes, I think tokenization is a very interesting topic. Uh, I don't have anything that is like big or meaningful, at least at this point, that we're like willing to share or talk about. But like I said, it's part of the list of things we think about a lot. But again, we're a small team, so we're trying to get as much done as we can without, and time and days are limited. And as you might imagine,
Hmm.
we between like doing the right partnerships, building the right products, working with the right regulators and legal teams, it doesn't really leave a lot of room. But again, if as new use cases that come to life, I think we'll absolutely start to like spend and expend a little bit more resources in that space. We're not there yet, though.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe next time we talk, there will be
Maybe
some
next time we
developments
talk.
on that front. Last major question for you. Where do you see the untapped potential for Visa in the near term and long term when it comes to integrating, blockchain technology and digital assets into payments and settlements and all these different other areas within Visa?
Um, I, Honestly, I think we're just getting started. And I think the industry is like also like relatively nascent. I know it's like 10, 12 years old, but ultimately, again, it all comes down to how quickly can we get regulatory clarity. I think that'll definitely unlock a lot more use cases and the speed
Hmm.
with which and the partners with which we can sort of like go to market. Um, I, I think even in the framework that I laid out, I think we have years and years of work ahead of us, and
Hmm.
very large TAMs that we can go and continue to capture cross borders, within borders, across infrastructure, across on ramps, off ramps. So I'm already like I'm already worried like how we'll be able to do the things that are already on our plate. So we'll see.
You got
We'll
to hire
see.
more
But we
people.
remain super excited though. We think it's gonna be a very, very fun few years in payments between the
Yeah.
work that we're doing on crypto, the work that we're doing across AI driven commerce. It's gonna be awesome.
Hmm. Aside from everything we've talked about so far, what else is something that you're paying attention to that you think our listeners should also watch?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll throw a plug in for some of the work that we're doing with many of our AI partners, OpenAI,
Mm.
Mistral, Anthropic, Microsoft, several others on creating agentic commerce standards. We have built a product with one API, five services for many of our AI clients to integrate into, so you can then use 4+ billion Visa credentials that can be then used at like over 150 million merchants on AI platforms natively in a frictionless way, and we're working very, very hard to go provide the delightful commerce experiences where we believe consumers are going. We think there are over 1 billion plus consumers today that are starting their discovery journeys on AI platforms, which means we think we're going to see a lot of payments, goods and services use cases coming out of those discovery journeys, which means that we need to make sure that, the payments ecosystem is ready and it works in a native, frictionless, fraudless way. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about building those experiences with our clients. And, I think ultimately a lot of those technologies will start to overlap some of the good work that we're doing on the crypto stablecoin side. We totally see that world sort of coming together as more and more sort of cures and use cases come live. So yeah, I'll throw in a plug in for that. That's super exciting. We're spending a lot of time on that.
What's the time frame for those two to come together? Near term, long term? Yeah.
Well, anyone that's ever anticipated how quickly AI is going to move has been proven wrong because it's moved faster than everyone else's expectations. So I'm going to not try and make a prediction on that. What we do know is things are moving very, very fast in a very positive way for consumers. So as long as we keep pace, who knows? We're probably talking a matter of single digit years, maybe sooner.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a fair answer. Last thing, Rubail, can you give us a piece of advice, something that you've carried with you throughout your career and time in this space?
In the crypto space, I'm not sure I am really qualified to give advice to many of your listeners.
Okay, maybe your life advice. Yeah.
I don't know. Focus on your kids. I have kids. That's my life advice. I love that. There's nothing else that's more important. None of this, as much as I love doing the work with some really bright people that we work with. In 10 years, I'm probably not going to remember what partnership I announced. I'm definitely going to remember how much time I spent with my kids. So that's my advice. Spend time with your kids if you have them.
Yeah. Love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was lovely.
Yeah.